everyone, how's it going? Matthew Bailey Media here, and welcome once again to another tier list video. Now this time it's going to be a little different. Normally I would have separated these, but I decided, you know what, I'm going to put these together. So this is my tier list of both the Disney animation movies and the Disney Pixar animation movies. I'm basically combining both the Walt Disney Animation Studios movies and the Pixar movies in this tier list. And if y'all want, like I said, if y'all want to know what I want, if y'all want me to do a different type of tier list similar to this, and let me know in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's get into it. Hey guys, so here we are finally at the Disney and Pixar rankings tier list. Now, the reason why I decided to combine both the Disney animation and the Disney Pixar movies is because I thought, you know what the hell? I figured since they're both kind of similar in a way, I figured it would make sense to do both studios. So but we will be starting with the Disney animation stuff first, and then we're gonna make our way to the Pixar stuff. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first movie, as you can clearly see on here, is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first ever Disney animated film to ever be posted. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed this one. I really did. I mean, it was definitely it was the first ever film Disney ever created, and you know that he was so proud of making this movie. And I will say that the story is so good. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about it. I mean, it's a shame, though, that the movie, unfortunately, is getting a huge ton of backlash. Not this movie specifically, but there is a live-action version of the movie coming out, and boy, is that going to be an interesting situation. But for now, when it comes to the original, it's obviously a huge classic. I mean, I actually would say this is like one of the really good films that there has ever been. So Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs definitely falls into that category. So next up we move on to Pinocchio. Now this is another movie that I had to wait. I wasn't alive when this came out, but when I saw it, I thought this one definitely is better than the live action one they tried to release. Definitely better, but if I had to say how good I think it is, I mean, it's not a bad movie. It definitely... The one thing I don't really like that they included, which I think is the one thing I was okay with in the live-action movie, is they did take out in the one scene in the movie when they're like at this weird carnival or like island that is like where no parents are around and all that sort of stuff. In this movie they make them drink beer and smoke or whatever, but in the in the new live action movie they did take that away, and that's the one thing I think was the right move on their part. The fact that they included it in this movie was not their best decision. So I still think it's an okay movie, but I'm gonna put it in row B, next to the or like I said, it's not a bad movie, but it's an okay film. Next up is Fantasia. Now, you may find this shocking, but I actually never saw the Fantasia movie. Next up is Dumbo. Now, the original Dumbo, I will say, it's an okay film. I mean, I mean, both this one and the live-action counterpart, I would say, probably fall in par with each other when it comes to how crazy their stories were. And I gotta say, but I didn't think it was that good of a film, so I'm probably gonna put it at C. Next up is Bambi. Now, ironically enough, Bambi was the last movie to come out before, back then was around the time of World War II, and there was a lot of stuff going on. So unfortunately, they couldn't release anything. And you'll see that every single movie after Bambi, up until Cinderella, I mean, I won't spoil it too much, but when it comes to Bambi, this was actually, I think, the first time that they ever did a parent dying in a Disney movie, which I thought was a bold move to pull. And I will say it's definitely one of those movies that, come on. Nope. There we go. I do like it more than Pinocchio. I will say. It was definitely a movie that I am relieved that, because again, it's the first ever Disney movie that they had a parent die in the movie before the main movie itself starts. And I gotta say, it was definitely something I wasn't expecting. And then, as I was about to say earlier, every single film that's up here up until Cinderella is actually movies that I have not seen. So yeah, got a lot of movies to put in the haven't seen section. Yeah, these are all movies that I never saw. But now we get into Cinderella, which was the first Disney movie that they finally were able to make after the war ended. And I will say, it was a good story. I mean, they really do kind of like expand on the story of Cinderella in the live action movie that they released back in 2015, so about 8 years ago. But I will say, this movie did an okay job at telling her story a little bit. And however, unlike the live action one, they had the animals be able to talk in this one. At least most of the animals. Not the only animals I think that did not talk were the cat, Lucifer, and the dog. But other than those two animals, the mice were able to talk. So that was interesting. But I will say, Cinderella, just like Snow White, in my opinion, is, like one of the better successful animated films that there is. I will say, it's a masterpiece to me. Next up is Alice in Wonderland. Now, oddly enough, I saw the live action movies of this, but I actually never saw the animated movie, which is quite a surprise. But I've heard that it's somewhat similar to like what we got in the first Alice in Wonderland live action movie. The only difference is it's not as dark. But that's actually going to come as quite a shock to you guys as to the Alice in Wonderland film. Next up, we've got Peter Pan. Yeah, you can tell Peter Pan is a movie that, honestly, at first I was surprised at how, at how much of a complex story this was. A young boy who never grows up, who apparently inspires a young girl, Wendy Darling, and her two brothers, John and Michael, to go to Neverland, and then he has to battle his big enemy, Captain Hook. And I will say, Tinkerbell is actually the character who, after Peter Pan came out, it seemed like it was nothing but, basically Tinkerbell became like the face of Disney when it comes to using the intros and all that sort of stuff. And again, it's an okay film, I will say. In fact, I think it's just on par with these movies. Definitely was a movie that I was not expecting to be good, but I thought it was okay. Next up is Lady and the Tramp. Now, Lady and the Tramp, I saw the live action movie, and now I've seen this one. I will say this is one of those movies that I didn't quite get. I mean, I didn't think it was bad. I just didn't think it didn't really pique my interest too much. I will say it definitely is better than Dumbo. Next up is Sleeping Beauty. Now, this is the movie that, honestly, you look at every single film that came out live action wise for the Disney live action remakes. I think it wasn't until they did, technically the live action version of this was based off of the villain Maleficent. But once they released the live action interpretation of the story, that's when they started really pushing out a bunch of live action Disney remakes. But at least once we got past Alice in Wonderland in 2010, it wasn't until 4 years later that we started to see a bigger trend of Disney live action remakes. And in regards to Sleeping Beauty, I think this story is much better than the live action version for sure. and I'm gonna have to put it up here just above Pinocchio. Again, the main reason why a lot of these are over Pinocchio is because of that beer and smoking scene specifically. Next up is 101 Dalmatians. Now, this was, I think, one of the first few Disney live-action remakes that we got before, and as well as a sequel that we actually didn't really have back when this movie came out. But when it comes to the original, I will say that that's the one good thing about the first live-action movie is that they didn't make the animals talk, and it sort of focused a lot more on the characters, on the main human characters, especially Cruella de Vil and how evil she was. That I got. But with this original movie, I still think it was a decent film. And again, I definitely find it better than Pinocchio. These are like a lot. The only two films I've really liked so far in this whole catalog is Snow White and Cinderella, which I think are interesting. Next up is The Sword and the Stone. Ironically, another movie I have not seen. Next up is The Jungle Book. Now, The Jungle Book is, again, one of those few films that really was like the pinnacle of stuff. And you know, ironically, I think The Jungle Book is one of the first movies to actually have more musical numbers in it and continued that trend for a while. But I think the next time we actually got a bunch of sing-along songs in a movie wasn't until Oliver and Company, which we'll get to that movie like in a little bit. But for The Jungle Book, I gotta say, it was that one iconic song is when the bear and the Mowgli kids sing the Bare Necessities. That was like the one song that really got me, and I gotta say, I definitely find it actually better than 101 Dalmatians in my opinion. Next up is The Aristocrats. Now, oddly enough, I've only ever seen this movie like one time. It was a long time ago, and I barely remember anything of it, so I might as well just put it under the haven't seen category, because again, it's been a long time since I've seen this movie. And the same can be said for Robin Hood. Now, here are some movies the next two movies are movies that I actually have not seen, which are Winnie the Pooh and The Rescuers. Neither one of these are movies that I saw when I was growing up. Next up, we've got The Fox and the Hound. Now, this is a movie, as a matter of fact, that I did manage to see recently, and I gotta say, it was a compelling story. A fox and a hound are usually mortal enemies, but then they become friends, and it's a tragedy the way that their story plays out. And I gotta say, it's definitely on par with, like, probably better than The Jungle Book in my opinion. It's not as good as these movies, but I mean, it's probably on par with what Bambi is, but I still think Bambi is better when it comes to telling that type of story. Next two movies that unfortunately I have not seen are The Great Mouse Detective and The Black Cauldron. Two movies that I still have not seen. Next up, we've got Oliver and Company. Now, that was one of the first ever movies that I think I actually did manage to watch back when I was growing up. And this movie, I gotta say, it's been a while, not as long as seeing movies like The Aristocrats or Robin Hood, but I mean, I still think this was an okay film. I probably put it just above Lady and the Tramp and Dumbo. Definitely an okay film. Next up is The Little Mermaid. Now, this is the original animated classic of The Little Mermaid. Now, even when the live action one came out earlier this year, I did say I really enjoyed it. And honestly, I don't know. I know there was a lot of backlash surrounding the whole race swapping Ariel and barely making her look like the character and not sticking too much to the original source material. But, I mean, when it comes to this movie, I think just like Snow White and Cinderella, it is one of those movies that you can never argue is like one of the best animated Disney classics of all time. now we got The Rescuers Down Under, which even though because I never saw The Rescuers, of course I never saw the sequel, The Rescuers Down Under. Next up is Beauty and the Beast. You guys know where this movie is going to be going. Right up here with the rest of them. If I had to choose though which of these movies I did actually like, I actually kind of like Beauty and the Beast over all of these ones. That was a good classic movie. Next up is Aladdin. Now, Aladdin, just like with the other ones I have in the S tier, this is one of those movies that I think I'm actually going to put in the A tier. I did like it. I did. I just think that it's not as better told as the other 4 movies that are already in the S tier. But now we're about to put another movie in the S tier, and you know that what that one is, The Lion King. Definitely goes over Beauty and the Beast. Like I said, these are ironic how 2 of these movies were like really old Disney films, and then 3 of these are Disney Renaissance films from 89 to 99. Next up, we've got Pocahontas. Now, Pocahontas, unfortunately, is one of those movies that tried to tell a story about the real Pocahontas, but unfortunately, because of the way they told it, some people didn't take too kind-hearted to that. But you may find this shocking, but I'm going to put it in the A tier. I think it's an okay film. It really is. Definitely one of those movies that I think most people give too much hate towards. Next up, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now, you may find this shocking, but unfortunately I have not seen this movie either. There are a lot of these movies I have not seen. And the same can be said for Hercules, another shocking movie that I have not seen. But now we move on to a lot of movies that I have seen, like Mulan. I will say Mulan is an interesting tale. They really did tell a compelling story about a young woman who did not want to lose her father, and she takes her father's place in the army to battle the Huns, and I will say that Eddie Murphy as Mushu in this movie was the real scene stealer of the whole movie. I really enjoyed how he portrayed the character, and as for Mulan herself, really compelling story arc. And just like this, I'm actually going to put it over Aladdin and Pocahontas. That was a much better story when it comes to trying to be diverse in a way. Next up is Tarzan. Now, you would think, I will say, the one thing that got me with this movie was that song, was that iconic song from the movie. I mean, it was such a tearjerker. I forgot what the actual title of the song is, but I do know that it was something I could never forget. And I'm actually going to put this just above Mulan. Funny how a lot of these Disney movies that have come out were all in the S and the A tier. And they're all part of the Disney Renaissance era, except for Cinderella and Snow White. Next up is Fantasia 2000. Again, another movie that I have not seen, unfortunately. Next up, we've got Dinosaur. Actually, I did not see this movie either. There are a lot of movies I have not seen. Next up, we've got The Emperor's New Groove. Now, this sort of is on par with these movies. If I had to say which one I like more, probably this one. It's not a bad film. It just isn't as compelling and engaging as all these other ones are in the Disney lineup. Next up, we have Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Oddly enough, another movie I have not seen. Lilo and Stitch. Now, the message that they portrayed in this movie was amazing. Ohana means family, and families stick together. And that is like the greatest message I could ever see in a movie. But oddly enough, I'm actually going to put it right here above Pinocchio. Because I think that one message was pretty good. Next movie that I have not seen, ironically, is Treasure Planet. I really do need to go and watch these two movies, Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and Treasure Planet, because it seems like these movies are really good. Next up is Brother Bear. Now, oddly enough, there is a sequel to this, like there is to a lot of these other Disney Renaissance movies. However, they did it like to a straight-to-DVD thing. But with Brother Bear, it's a really interesting story. A young boy known as Kenai who learns the hard way of his actions have consequences, and he needs to learn how to love when it comes to animals like bears. Again, I think it was a compelling story. I didn't think it was as good though as Bambi. You may find that a little controversial, but that's just my thoughts. Next up is Home on the Range, another movie I have not seen. Man, there are a lot of movies on here that I haven't seen, but I've still got a few of them in the S, A, B, and C tiers. Now, here's where we get to our first ever bad movie, Chicken Little. You guys know where this one's going. Yep, that's where it's going. I'm sorry, but I just did not understand what they were thinking with this movie. Oddly enough, this was the first, or not the first, this actually was the second 3D animated movie that they ever did for Disney films. So that you may find that pretty surprising, but next up is Meet the Robinsons. Now this movie, it's been a while since I've seen this one, but I didn't quite understand what the whole point of this movie was. I mean, I will say it's definitely on probably better than Lady and the Tramp and Dumbo, but the way that they tell it's sort of like a Back to the Future spin-off in a way, and I will say I still think Back to the Future is a better storyteller than this one is. Next we have Bolt. Now I will say I didn't think I was going to like this movie when I first saw it. But I will say that after rewatching it a few weeks ago, I gotta say, Bolt, that one song when he's traveling back to San Francisco or to Hollywood to reunite with his owner, I will say that song really shows you what you're missing in life, and that's what Bolt really was going through. And I gotta say, that little moment probably puts it just above Peter Pan next to Brother Bear, because they both had songs that I just couldn't, got me to tears. Next up is Princess and the Frog. Now, Princess and the Frog is one of those movies that I gotta say, I didn't think I would like it, but boy did I actually end up liking it. In fact, I liked it so much that I probably would put it just above Peter Pan. It was a decent film. Next up is Tangled. Now, this is almost the first movie that they finally started to go full-on 3D. And I will say this is a compelling story. In fact, you guys may find this surprising, but I'm actually going to put it in the S tier, just behind The Little Mermaid. I really think that this is the first ever 3D animated film to make it into my list of successful animated movies. I really loved the story it told. Next up is another movie, unfortunately, I haven't seen, which is another Winnie the Pooh film. Next up, we got Wreck-It Ralph. Now, this, to me, is one of the few Disney movies that had a crazy twist villain that I was not expecting. Nobody could have expected the twist as to who the villain actually was in this movie. And I gotta say, I think it deserves to be in the A category, just above Pocahontas. Again, the way they told his story was so a villain who wanted to be good but he couldn't. Again, I just think it was amazing. Next we have Frozen. Now, you know me when it comes to like when any of you saw my $1 billion rankings video, I did put Frozen really high, but if I have to be honest, the first Frozen to me probably goes just above Pocahontas. It was a compelling story, I will admit. It was basically adapting, I forgot what the name of the book is, something to do with the Snow Queen or something, and that's who Elsa was in this movie. And I gotta say, I really did enjoy it. Next up is Big Hero 6. Oddly enough, this is the first legit superhero Disney animated film that came out before The Incredibles. Or no, actually it came out after The Incredibles, but this was the first one that was just by Disney Animation. And Big Hero 6, to me, definitely seems like it did a better job at telling the story than Bolt did, but I still think it was a decent film. Next up, we've got Zootopia. Now, Zootopia, again, just like with Frozen and Wreck-It Ralph, I think it was just barely enough to get over both of them. I think Zootopia is a wonderful film. I am so excited because it was announced that there is a sequel coming out for that. And with the one fan theory about Nick and Judy, our two main characters, being love interest for each other, that's going to be an interesting story. Next up is Moana. Now, Moana, I gotta say, I was not surprised. I was so shocked at how well this movie ended up being. In fact, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Dwayne Johnson can sing. I mean, he really can sing. Now, I will say, I definitely feel like it's on par with Zootopia when it comes to how well they told a compelling story. And oddly enough, they both came out at the same time. Isn't that crazy? But next up, we've got Ralph Breaks the Internet. 6 years after the release of the first Wreck-It Ralph, I will say it was sort of a downgrade from the first movie, but I definitely think it was probably, I'll say it was probably right here in the A tier. I mean, it was still a pretty entertaining film, but I didn't think it was that great. Next up is Frozen 2. Now, Frozen 2 is, again, I love the first movie, but I think I love the second movie just a little better than the first movie, because to me, that is like one of the greater stories when it comes to telling the story of the two sisters. Next up, we've got Raya and the Last Dragon. Now, this is the first movie that came out post-pandemic that it did get delayed, and I will say this one and the next movie after it were definitely okay films, I will say. But when you look at how well Raya told their story, I will say, you may find this shocking, but I'm actually going to put it just above Big Hero 6. I think it was a decent film. I mean, it wasn't too much of a downgrade after the event, after Frozen 2, but I still think it was interesting. The main focal story point of this whole movie was about trusting one another, and I think that was a pretty interesting tale. Next up, we have Encanto. Now, this is the second to last Disney movie to have been released recently. The next one we're about to get is Wish, so hopefully that movie ends up being good. But with Encanto, when it comes about how strong you are and how connected you are to your family, Mirabelle is a good example of being out of touch with her family, especially her main ancestor, her like great grandmother who was still alive. I mean, I just think it was and it's funny because they made her grandmother seem like a villain, but she really wasn't. And I will say, this is one of those movies that I say is kind of tied with Raya and the Last Dragon in a way, but I still prefer Raya over Encanto. And now we move on to the last Disney animated movie of this lineup before we move on to the Pixar. So for the last Disney animated movie, we got Strange World. Now, I'm sorry, but this goes in the F tier. I did think it was a little bit better than Chicken Little, but still think it was like one of the worst films they ever could have done. And oddly enough, this was the only Disney anime movie that came out, or that was being in pre-production and filming during Bob Chapek's reign as CEO of Disney. Raya and the Last Dragon and Encanto were done before Bob Iger left, so that is exactly why I think those movies were a lot better, and it just went had a huge down drop with Strange World. Now I'm hoping Wish is not going to have the same issue, but we'll see what happens. So now we finally move into the Pixar movies. So these are going to be mixed in with what I think of the other Disney animated films. So first up, we've got Toy Story. Now, you know that Toy Story is like one of those few franchises that I just cannot believe how great it was. And I'm going to have to put Toy Story in the S tier, but I'm probably going to put it behind Tangled. Mainly because this was supposed to be strictly Disney animation, but I figured I'd squeeze in the Pixar movies into it. Next up is A Bug's Life. Now, A Bug's Life is unfortunately one of those movies that I didn't, just like with Ants during my DreamWorks ranking, I didn't quite understand this movie. I didn't think it was that bad. I mean, I think I put it over Meet the Robinsons, Lady and the Tramp, and Dumbo. Then we got Toy Story 2. Again, another successful movie that honestly I think I liked more than the first one. Then we got Monsters, Inc. A movie that honestly I can't believe how well made it was. I mean, I also will say I'm kind of glad that they did the prequel movie, Monsters University, because it did give a little bit more depth into the characters. But with the first Monsters, Inc., I think it was better than Pocahontas, but definitely a compelling story. Next up, we got Finding Nemo. Again, just like the first Toy Story, it was a really good film. In fact, I might say it's even better than just the first Frozen. I still think I like the Frozen 2 more than Finding Nemo, but I do think it's definitely better than the first Frozen, in my opinion. Next up is The Incredibles. And just like with Big Hero 6, this was the first Disney Pixar superhero movie to come out, and I thought it was really good. I will say Syndrome was a pretty interesting villain, and I can't believe I'm finally about to do this, but I actually kind of liked it more than Moana, actually, but still not as good as Zootopia. Next up is Cars. Now, Cars is a franchise that I really didn't get at first, but I still think it is one of the better movies that deserve to be in the C tier for me. Now we get on to Ratatouille. Ratatouille, I can't believe I'm saying this, but this is going in the friggin' S tier, just above Snow White. I finally put something else in the S tier, but just above in my top 3 pretty much. Yeah, I mean right now you look at my top 5 Pixar and Disney animation movies, and I've only got one Pixar movie in that lineup. Next up, we've got WALL-E. Another compelling story that honestly you did not think. The twist as to who the villain was pretty surprising for me, but I gotta say, it was definitely on par. Pretty good film. In fact, I may actually think it's better than Monsters, Inc. Next up, we got Up. And this was the last Disney Pixar movie to come out before most of the stuff that came out afterwards was nothing but sequels and prequels to certain things. The only original movies we got after Up were Brave, Inside Out, The Good Dinosaur, Coco, and that was about it. But with Up, I will say this also had a shocking villain reveal that honestly I didn't think this movie was going to have a villain. But but that beginning, oh, it's probably on par with what happened in Bambi. I mean, the way that they did that opening, I think this one beats out Bambi anytime. Next up is Toy Story 3. Now, you may find this shocking, but this was, to me, is one of the best movies in the franchise. Definitely better than the first two, because it was the to me, they really should have ended the series after Toy Story 3. It was a great way to say goodbye to Andy, and unfortunately we'll get to Toy Story 4 later, but I still think it made no sense to do that. Next up, we've got Cars 2. And this is the first Pixar movie to, unfortunately, go in here. In fact, but I will say I definitely prefer it over Strange World and Chicken Little, but I didn't get why they made... I don't think they made the right choice putting Mater in the spotlight and basically tossing McQueen to the side, because it was his franchise. Next up, we've got Brave. It's the only Disney Pixar movie to have a Disney princess, and I will say I definitely found it better than... To me, I actually think it was better than Peter Pan. To me, I thought it was okay. Now, I know I made a list a long time ago of my Disney Pixar rankings, and I think I had Brave near the bottom of my list, but I since changed my mind since watching that movie. Especially because I'm also ranking the Disney animated films with this. Next up, we got Monsters University, a prequel to Monsters, Inc. that, to me, was an okay film. I mean, I think it was probably better than Bolt, actually, in my opinion, because it was a origin story to the characters, in my opinion. Next up, we've got Inside Out, another movie that brought me to tears near the end. In fact, I actually think it's almost on par with Toy Story 3 when it comes to the tearful ending at the end. Next up, we got Finding Dory, a sequel to Finding Nemo that, unfortunately, I think it was not as good as Finding Nemo, but I still think it was... I feel like it's just... Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to put it just right here. Probably over Big Hero 6, in my opinion. It was a really interesting situation. And I gotta scroll down now just to be able to look at the movies. Next up, we've got The Good Dinosaur. Unfortunately, this is another movie that I didn't quite understand. I really don't get what was the point of this movie. Next up, we've got Cars 3. So far, it's the only other Cars sequel in the trilogy. I will say it was a huge improvement from Cars 2, and in fact, I even may say it's better than the first Cars, but I still think it deserves to be in the C tier. Next up is Coco. Now, kind of like what happened with Up and a few other, and Raya and Kanto. These are movies that I think sort of combine with this. If you put those storylines combined, it's kind of like what you would get in Coco, in a way. It basically tells the story of a young boy who wants to play music, and because it makes him happy, but his family has a tragic history with music, and the main vocal point or message of the story is what family is supposed to support you, help, and they're supposed to help you, like, and support you in your decisions on what you want to do in life. Especially when they're good. Now, if it was a bad thing that you want to do in your life, then I can see why they probably wouldn't be so happy with it. But the way that they tell that messaging in this story is amazing. And in fact, I'm actually going to be putting this just above Up, in my opinion. Definitely a decent, compelling story. Next up, we got The Incredibles 2. Another movie that, honestly, I was shocked, to say the least, that I didn't know what was going on with this movie. I still think it was a worthy sequel to the first Incredibles, but if I'm being totally honest, I think it was just above WALL-E in my opinion. Again, these are all pretty good films, I must say. Next up is Toy Story 4. We're finally into Toy Story 4. Now, unfortunately, they really should have ended the franchise after the third movie. But I will say I did think it was kind of okay to, because the first three movies were basically a way of saying goodbye to Andy. This movie sort of said goodbye to Woody, and I think, but unfortunately they were already in the process of making Toy Story 5, and I really hope that this movie, they really need to stop after 5 in my opinion. Now the rumor is that they actually are thinking about bringing back Andy and his kids, and it's rumored that they may actually finally make it revealed to Andy that his toys were alive this whole time. And I hope that they pull that off. I don't know how they're going to pull it off, but with Toy Story 4, I think it was an okay movie. I mean, it's definitely not as good as, like, say, I would say this is where I would put it. It was a downgrade from the other three, but I still think it was a decent film. Next up, we've got Onward. Now, this is the first movie to come out after Bob Chapek unfortunately went away, and as a matter of fact, this is the only, both this and the next movie, Soul, are the only ones to have been made, I think, before Bob Iger retired and Bob Chapek took over. So, with Onward, I gotta say, this was definitely a compelling story. So much so that I think I actually prefer it over Brother Bear. Excuse me. I think it was a really good tale of two brothers bonding, and I mean, what more could someone ask for? Next up, we've got Soul. Now, this movie was the very first movie from Pixar to be released straight to their streaming platform, Disney Plus, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. But I will say that I think it was an okay film. It was definitely an interesting one, but I will say I don't think it was as good as Onward or Brother Bear. Probably put it right here, behind Encanto. Definitely a better film than I thought it was going to be. Next up, we've got Luca. Now, Luca is, I think, one of those few films that came out when Bob Chapek was in charge, because it seemed like a lot of movies that came out during his time were made during his time where there was a specific agenda that I really don't want to talk about too much, but they did include some characters in each of these movies that to me, just like with Strange World, but I will say it wasn't too focused on those characters, like it was in Strange World. And I gotta say, this movie definitely deserves to be in the B tier. I would say it's probably better than Brave, in my opinion. Definitely an okay film. Next up is Turning Red. Now, this movie may appeal to younger girls when it comes to the message it told in the movie, which was your body's going through changes when you turn a certain age. And she was 13. I think she turned 13 in this movie, and I gotta say, I really don't quite get how. I will say I think it was an okay film, but I don't think it was better than Luca. In fact, I think I prefer Brave over this, but still a decent film. Next up is Lightyear. Now, this is technically a spin-off to the Toy Story films, and it was supposed to tell the story of how Buzz became the person he was in the first movie, but unfortunately, just like with Strange World, they unfortunately pushed a little agenda with one specific character that was squeezed in there during the beginning of the movie, and I'm sorry, but this is the first movie that actually is in the D tier for me. It was not that I didn't enjoy the character of Buzz, and especially since he was voiced by Chris Evans this time instead of Tim Allen, but I think that is one of the main reasons why people were not happy. And finally, we come to our last known Pixar movie with Elemental. And this, I will say, is definitely a better improvement after what happened with Lightyear, unfortunately. In fact, I actually think it is better than Luca. In fact, I may actually say it's better than Wreck-It Ralph 2. I really do think that we're starting to slowly get back on track with a lot of these Disney movies. I feel like once it got to Strange World, it really seemed like a lot of movies that, well, technically Lightyear came out before Strange World, but I think once Lightyear came out, it slowly went pfft. So yeah, unfortunately Lightyear and Strange World really were the movies that, to me, were definitely under Bob Chapek's control a lot. But so that is my list for both Disney Animation and Disney Pixar. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Now, I'm not sure what my next tier list video is going to be, but I will say that it's going to be an interesting situation on what I decide to do for my next tier list. Let me know what you guys want me to do next in the comment section below. If I manage to find a way to do it, then I will do it. But if not, I'll figure out what I'm going to do for my next video. So anyways, I will see all you guys in the next video.